What's up, guys? Today I'm going to walk you through my podcast episode assets generator. In this workflow, you'll be able to generate all of your post production assets for your podcast with one click of a button. Just upload the transcript into your Notion database, click Get Assets, and out will come all of the repurposed assets from the transcript that you can think of. Things like titles, descriptions, quote cards, post pages, anything that you need to generate after a podcast episode. You simply add it as a prompt or an asset that you want to generate. And then with the click of a button, it's being generated for you in your Notion database. So let's walk through how this actually works. Let's jump into the actual Notion database page where you're going to manage all of your podcast episodes and generate those repurposed assets. This is the Notion database page that's pre-built for you. And if you want access to this, head over to the Content Agent community. This is a community that I run where I give away all of my Notion templates, n8n workflows, and the trainings on how to combine the two in order to scale your content-led business. So make sure to head over there. You'll be able to find these templates. So this is a Notion database where every time a new guest comes onto my podcast, I'd put them into this database and it collects a bunch of information about my guest. So if we click into this awesome guest called Dave Polikoff, I have a form here in the page, and then I invite my guest to this page. They fill out the form, enter in things like their name, title, company, description about their brand or business, their social handles, all that kind of stuff. And then the cool part is I have some AI properties set up so that it's automatically pulling that information from the page that the guest entered and adding it as a separate property to the page itself. And that is going to be useful in just a second. Then after I record the episode, I have a column here called episode transcript where I paste in the transcript along with the timestamps within that transcript and speaker labels, things like that. And so the combination of the transcript of the episode and the details about the guest are what run or feed the AI workflow to generate all of those post-episode assets. So let's walk through how that actually works. So now that I have my transcript details and the guest details within the page itself, I simply click to open the guest episode, and there's a button here that says Get Assets. I just click on that. And within a few seconds, you'll see the assets are starting to already come back from our automation. So you'll see things like a title, a podcast description, a post page, the page that I publish onto the podcast website, for SEO purposes, and things like that. So let's jump into what's coming back now. So the podcast title. I have a podcast called Personal Brand Blueprint, and I have a specific title format that I need every episode to go to run through. So I fed that as a prompt, and out comes the exact title format, 3 different titles to choose from. I can choose one, add that in as my title for the episode. Podcast description, I have a very specific podcast description format that I fed as the prompt, and out comes the details. So it's the details about my brand here, the details of the guest and the host, timestamps. So having the timestamps in that transcript plays itself here. Quote card. So any quotes that were mentioned in the episode that would be worthy of a social media post are listed here. The post page. So I post a dedicated page for the episode that breaks everything down by a summary, key questions answered, so like an FAQ section, quotes, keywords, etc. So you can see here about 8 different assets are being automatically generated for me to publish not just the episode, but also promote the episode using separate post pages or quote cards and whatnot. And for assets that I can give to my guest for them to promote the episode as well. So, question you might be asking is, okay, how does it know what assets to actually create and publish? And so there's a separate database called the episode assets database. And this is where we manage all of the assets that we want to have created for our episodes. And so there are 14 different options or prompts here that we can use as 14 different assets that'll be repurposed from our transcript and episode details. You can add more if you want. It just means you would need to change a few things with the workflow, which I'll show you in a second. But 14 is plenty for most of us in terms of what we need to have created after an episode. So for me, some of the things that I like created are the title, description, quote cards, post page, a promo post. So when I publish the episode on LinkedIn, what that text post is that's promoting the episode, a newsletter, a promo clip, a video clip, and the thumbnail that needs to be created for the episode as well when it goes on YouTube. And so each of these is a prompt that I am providing an AI agent so it knows what to create. So if we go into one, for example, the podcast title, I have simply the asset prompt based on the details found in the podcast transcript, write 3 SEO-friendly title options in the following format. I give it a template, and then I give it example outputs, and I give it examples of what the end result should look like. Same thing with podcast description. Based on the transcript, create a description for the episode. I give it a template, and then I give it a finalized example below. And I do that for each one. That's all these are, is just, asset prompt along with an example. And again, you can create up to 14 of these. And what's even cooler is you can even, you don't need to use all 14 assets. And then for the assets that you do have listed out, you can also enable or disable them every time you go to run the workflow as well. So if I didn't want to, if all I did was I wanted to create, let's say, the promo social post and the title, for example, I've disabled all the ones I didn't want to have created. And we'll go back into here. We will delete the assets that were created. And now when I go to run the workflow again, we'll see that instead of creating all 8 of those assets, it's only going to create the podcast title and the promo social post this time around. So there's the podcast title, and then shortly after will be the promo social post. And while that's being created, I'll then just kind of also mention you can add a page emoji as well to the Notion page. So you can choose which emoji you want. And you can see here it's attached to the page that gets created just for kind of organizational sake. But now we can see here just the podcast title and just the promo social post was created instead of all 8 assets. And that's because we can enable and disable them based on if we need it for that episode or not. So you can also see here that the status is selected here as well. So if you have a team that you then want to assign these tasks to, you can assign that along with the statuses and manage the workflow of these post-production assets as well. So now that we've seen it kind of work in action, let's actually go through the workflow and see how this thing is operating between n8n and Notion. So if we hop over to the Notion workflow, I want to walk you through the entire workflow step by step. So first, let's actually run it. So I'm going to toggle this off and get the test URL. We're going to change this. So we'll go into here, and I want to show you also too kind of how the workflow works. So the first step is a webhook. So we're receiving a webhook from the Notion database, which is being triggered by this button up here, Get Assets. So if we go into edit this property, edit this button, you'll see it's just changing the URL over to the test URL. So it's when you click the button, send the webhook, and all we're sending is the episode name to through the webhook. And we'll click save here. So that is just a simple webhook button sending to the webhook initial trigger node in n8n. And so we will listen for a test event and do a trigger. So we'll say get assets. And all that's doing is, again, just triggering the workflow, sending it through the webhook, and kind of the outputs that are being sent over are just the name of the page that's it was triggered by. So now this next step after that is it's a Notion node lookup step. So what we're doing is we're looking up a database page and we're getting the details from that page, and we're looking it up by the ID, the page ID from that Notion page. And so all we're doing is pulling from the webhook that came in, we're finding the ID of the page. I believe it's this one here. And we'll use this ID, this page ID, and put it into here to just look up all of the details behind that page that triggered the workflow to begin with. So if we execute that step, now we're getting all of the details from that page in Notion. So that's including the transcript, all of the guest information like role, name, socials, all that kind of stuff is being pulled into our workflow. And that's important because we're going to use that when we go to generate the content. We need all of not just the transcript, that's the critical part, but also all of the guest information, socials and role and all that kind of stuff to help support the creation of like the descriptions and all that kind of stuff. So now we are pulling all of that information. Now we take kind of a separate step here away from the information from Notion, from that page. And next, we're looking up the information around the prompts or the assets that we want to generate from that transcript. So you'll see a list here of these 14 different Notion node lookups. And these 14 Notion nodes are all correlated to the 14 possible assets that we could create from the transcript. And again, you can go in and add whatever assets you want to have generated based on the transcript. So, if whatever you create as a post episode asset, you can go in here and add. So maybe if it's like you want quotes so that you can create quote cards, maybe it is descriptions. Maybe you want to look for moments within the episode that you think would be share worthy as a clip. You can add that as a prompt. Really, you can do whatever you can imagine for as a post asset. The main thing is just putting it in as a prompt. So by default, you're going to get this kind of asset prompt example output as the template. You just need to go in here and give it instructions and say, based on the transcript you've been provided, generate XYZ. And then example output, here's the format and finished result example that I'm expecting as the output and result. So just feed it the instructions and then feed it an example, and it will be able to generate that for you. So again, these are the assets that I've created. So I don't use all 14, um, but it will look up all 14 and see if there is something there and if it should be creating it. So that's the next step. But first, let's go into the actual prompt itself so we can see what it's doing. So this is a lookup field, and it's pulling whatever's in that page. So it's looking up the page in our episode assets database, and each of these workflows is assigned to each potential asset or prompt in this database. So you can see there's prompt 01 all the way down to prompt 14. This top node here is looking up prompt ID equals prompt 01. So this specific workflow is assigned to look up the information in prompt 01 in the episode assets database. So look up a database page, get the information from that page. Which asset or which database are we looking this page up in? It's under the episode assets database. And then which specific database entry are we looking up? That's going to be the prompt 01 entry. And if we look up for the second workflow, this one is assigned to prompt 2, all the way down to the bottom where it's looking up prompt 14. So if we execute this step, you can see here the output has the details for the page itself. And next, we're going to look at whether we are executing that workflow or not. So if we go to this if node is looking up the properties of the prompt itself and seeing if the enabled property here, property enabled, is true or false. So basically that's saying, did we click on, is it checked or unchecked? If it's checked, it is true. If it's unchecked, it's false. And so it's looking up the enable field, and is it true or false? If it's enabled or true, then the workflow is true, and it will continue the workflow throughout the rest of the n8n workflow and process, so that if we disable the checkbox, it will be this workflow here will be false, and it won't continue the workflow for that one. So that's how we're deciding, or the workflow is deciding, if it should generate that asset or not, is with this if property. Is that checkbox checked? If it is, it's true, continue the workflow. If it's not checked, it's false, do not continue the workflow. And so it's not generating that asset. So we'll go to the next step, which is a field normalizer step. So I'll execute this workflow here while that runs. And all this is really doing is taking the information from the previous steps and just assigning a new title to it to just organize this information, since a lot of this information is being kind of pulled from the Notion database, and we kind of just want to organize this into formalize the names and details of all the information for the steps that are happening post this step. So basically just things like asset title, taking the transcript and actually putting a formalized transcript title to it, parent page ID, which is going to be important later on in the workflow for knowing which page initiated the workflow, so we know where to put the assets. things like guest title, company name, guest website, all that stuff. We're just formalizing the actual names of these things because in the next couple steps, we're going to actually start incorporating all of those assets or those properties into instructions to the AI agent. So that's all this step is. Now, next step is to get the instructions from the database pages itself, the prompt databases itself. So here is, we're going to find the child blocks. This is a Notion child blocks lookup node. So what we're doing is we're looking up a page and its child blocks or the details within that page, and we're passing that information along. So this is, we're looking up blocks and we're looking to get all of the child blocks, return all, and we are finding it based on the page ID, which is from here, page ID. And this is the page ID that we pulled from the previous step when we decided if we are running the workflow or not. So in this step, we are looking up the Notion episode assets page here, and we're looking up all the details about that workflow or that entry in the Notion database. And then in this step here, we're deciding, are we going to generate this asset or not? If yes, continue. So then in this step, we're saying, okay, we are generating that asset. Now let's pull the information from that page to see what the details are of the asset we're generating. And so we have the page ID from that previous step where we looked up the actual Notion database entry itself. And the function of this node is to go into that page, look up the details of the prompt that we gave it in the example output, and pull that information back into the workflow. So we'll click execute step, and I'll show you what the outputs are. All right, so what's happening here is in each step, in each of the Notion prompts, the assets that we can be creating from the episode assets database, it's returning 7 different items, which means 7 different blocks were found in the database, the Notion database entry. So in Notion, they break everything into blocks, which means this right here is one block, this right here is another block, this right here is another block, and there's 7 of those different blocks. It pulls all 7 of those blocks back into the workflow, and each one of those is presented as a block item, and then the different information is put under this content property here as object. Asset prompt is the first block item, and as you can see here, asset prompt, so that's what it's pulling as the first one. The second block or item that it has would be all of this information. And so as you can see, the information from the Notion page itself is being pulled, but it's being pulled in as 7 separate items. And that's not what we want. We want one long text post that we can use to feed the AI agent. So that's why in the next step, we have an aggregate step. And what that's doing is it's aggregating an individual field, which we have identified as content, which is this field here, the content field. And it's aggravating all of those from 7 separate items into just one text string. So, and then we're renaming that as prompt. So it's taking the 7 different items from all the different 7 blocks within that Notion page, putting it into just one block or item for us. So if we click execute, now there is one item called prompt, and all of the details are under as one text string under one concept called prompt. So now we get to our AI agent. And if we click into the AI agent, this is where kind of all the magic is happening. All the things that we've done in the previous steps of the workflow are all coming together at this point. So first and foremost is the prompt. So, we'll define what's happening here first. So up here, there is a prompt to the agent as to the details of what to create. And then below here is the actual agent's responsibilities. So it knows what type of agent it is and what it should do, what information it's receiving, how it should use that information, etc. So if we click into that, the agent we've defined as a content repurposing assistant. It's trained to transform long-form content into high-impact short-form assets, right? So basically, it's taking a long-form transcript along with other details and creating short-form assets, things like titles and descriptions, maybe a newsletter from your podcast, what have you. Then it's given instructions. You will always be given a transcript, an asset prompt, an example output, and any additional supporting links. So basically, kind of 4 main things, one of which is obviously the transcript that we need to feed it. The other is the prompt. What asset are you creating? The example output, which is here's the instructions for creating the thing, but here's also an example of what the output should be. And then additional supporting links. In this case, it is those guest information links, their socials, their role details, etc. So you are given a bunch of context. Your job is to transform all of that context into short form assets. So again, here, objective, analyze the transcript to extract key themes, messages, emotional arcs, etc. Follow the asset prompts to understand your instructions, personalize your content using the brand's voice, offer value, etc. And there's a bunch more kind of guidelines and checklists and things to guide the AI agent in how to create this content and make sure that it comes out exactly as we want it to come out. So that's mainly what this the kind of instructions, the AI agent instructions are. And then now it needs the prompt details in order to know what to create. So first and foremost is the prompt information at the top. The prompt information is the aggregated prompt details from the episode assets page. So the prompt, this JSON prompt script here is basically all the information from your prompt page. It's pulling all this information. The last step, it aggregated it into one concept called prompt, which is what this is, and then this is moved into this. So the first thing that the AI agent is reading is asset prompt based on the details found in the podcast description, write 3 SEO-friendly title, yada, yada, yada. So this is the instructions the AI agent is being told. Next is the episode transcript. So we are pulling from the field normalizer step the transcript, and we're pulling that into here. So we're telling it, hey, based on the transcript that you are going to be provided, here are here's your instructions on what to do with that transcript. Then next, we're providing it the full transcript. So we're pulling in the full transcript from the initial podcast page property. So now it has instructions, it has the transcript, and then additionally, guest bio information. So the guest bio's full name, the title, company name, etc., socials. And what we're doing is putting guest full name or guest title or guest company name, and then pulling that information from the field normalizer step as well. So all of this information here is information pulled from the property details associated with the episode. And we're just putting that right next to the name. So guest company name, we're just taking the company name, guest company name detail and putting that right next to it. So now the AI agent has the instructions of the asset that it needs to create, the transcript that it's using as the source material for creating that asset, and all of the guest information, including role, title, company, social links, etc. And so if we click execute step, it's going to use all that information to create the output, which in this case is the title for the episode, suggested titles for the episode, and that's the output. So again, just real quickly before moving on, we're pulling in the information, or we're getting the first domino is being triggered based on the click of the button, get assets. That's triggering a webhook. Next step is that we are looking up all the details of that entry. So we know the transcript information, all the details about the guest, all that kind of stuff. Then we are looking up what assets are we going to be creating. And we're doing that from the episode assets directory, and we're enabling or disabling those assets based on if we want to create them for that workflow or not. And then within each asset, we're giving instructions and example outputs for each one. Based on whether we said we enabled or disabled that asset or not, it's moving along in the workflow. We're normalizing all that information. In this step, if we are creating that asset, it's finally pulling the instructions from the assets page. We are aggregating all those instructions into just one prompt. And then in the AI agent, we are actually telling the agent, create this asset based on these instructions and this transcript and all that kind of stuff. Now, in the next step, when we send information back to Notion, it can only receive through the API, it can only receive about 2,000 characters at a time. So in this step, all we're doing is we're slicing up the output from the previous step into 2,000 character blocks. And so if we wanted to create like a long form newsletter from the episode that might be like 6,000 characters long, it wouldn't be able to be passed through the API one at a time or all at once. So instead, we slice up the output into 2,000 character slices, and the output is 3 separate 2,000 character outputs at a time. Most of the time, you'll only really need to use one of the outputs. Your output will probably be less than 2,000 characters, but if it's a longer form newsletter, maybe a longer form description, you might need to use 2, sometimes even 3 different blocks of 2,000 characters in order to send your information. And basically, what's happening is in the next step, we have a Notion page updater node where we are looking up first, we're creating a new page in the original podcast episode database. And first we need to look up what was the initial page that generated this whole workflow. And so we're looking up the parent item, which is, if we go back to the field normalizer, we can see that we have a parent page ID, and that's all this is. So the parent ID is the parent page ID from the field normalizer. And what that's doing is it's looking up what was the initial page that that triggered the step, because this is the page that we want to add the assets under as a sub item. So that's what that is. The key name or ID, the episode name. So in this case, it's actually not the episode name that you are adding in. It is the title of the asset that you are the asset that was created. So if we go back to the episode assets, this name here is what is going to be entered into the episode name underneath the main episode. So we're pulling that asset title from the field normalizer, the asset title. In this case, it's quote card, and that's going to be what the episode name is. Then also you can identify a title, or I'm sorry, a status. In this case, we want all of the statuses to be to do. And then what is going to go into the page itself, and that's going to be the output from the AI agent. So we are creating a new block in the page. That's going to be a paragraph block. And then we're going to add in text blocks within that page. And what we're doing here is, when we created those slices from the previous step, we have output 1, output 2, output 3. We're just creating 3 separate text blocks and pulling in output 1. You'll see output 2 and output 3. So essentially all we're doing is, since we have to send over our outputs in 2,000 character blocks, that's what this is. It's 3 separate blocks, each 2,000 characters long. So in case we had a really long output, it's not getting jammed up in the API, and it's sending it over, kind of sequentially. And that's all that is. So then when we click execute step, it knows what the parent page was based on the parent ID that we included, so that it knows to put it as a sub item to the parent page, which is our episode. So now when we send over all of that information, all those assets, it adds it to the main episode page instead of adding it as like a separate page altogether, because each individual page in this database is an episode, not an asset. The repurposed assets for that episode we want to be added underneath the episode. So that is the full workflow, from triggering it from the episode itself, based on the transcripts that you have, the transcript that you have from the episode, adding that in as its own property, also including all of the guest information, and then triggering that workflow so that it pulls the information about that episode. It then looks up all of the assets that could potentially be created from our episode assets database, sees if we are creating that asset. If so, moves it along. We then normalize all of that information just to help us clean up some things for the rest of the workflow. We're then pulling the asset instructions and example outputs from each of those pages that we've enabled and we want to create. We then aggregate all of that information into one text string, and then we're passing the asset instructions, output, transcript, and guest details into an AI agent that is instructed to take long-form content like a transcript and translate it into short-form content like a title, podcast episode, description, etc. We are then slicing up that output so that it can be passed through a Notion API. And then this last step is that it's sending the outputs as a sub item to our main episode so that all of the assets that get created get tucked and added into the main episode page. So, as you can see here, the core workflow or use case for this workflow is if you run a long form content business like podcast or YouTube channel. This is really helpful for if you have a podcast that where you have guests that come on, largely because it not only helps you be able to create assets for your own show, but also all of the additional assets that you need to create to provide to guests is a lot of times can bottleneck your workflow. But it can also work just as well for those who don't have guests and are just kind of solo podcasts or YouTube channels that record content, record episodes, record YouTube videos, and then want a way to quickly be able to create the suggested title, description, thumbnail details, a dedicated post page to publish onto your website, whatever the post-production assets that you need to create for your podcast or YouTube channel. This is basically a content repurposing tool. So however you kind of want to fit it into your custom workflow for your needs, this can fit that as well. So if you are looking to be able to get this workflow, this n8n template and the Notion databases so you can run this entire thing, go check out my free community. It's called The Content Agent. It's at Skool.com. There'll be a link in the description below where I give away all of these content-focused automations to help you scale your content-led brand. So go check out The Content Agent at Skool.com. Again, link in the description below. And look forward to seeing you over there.